Xiao is just an ordinary delivery worker trying to muscle through a city that feels like it's been baked in an oven too long. Even before the weirdness starts, the heat is already winning, and he's losing the argument by the minute. At the construction detour, Xiao cuts a deal to keep moving, because a late delivery in this weather is still better than standing still and melting in place. The workers wave him through, which only proves everyone in the city is improvising on a very bad day. Then the heat stops being background misery and turns into a problem with teeth. Xiao hits a stretch of road where his body starts failing on him, and the first sign of trouble is that awful feeling that something is crawling out of reality itself. Xiao comes out of that stretch shaken, with the world around him warped and ruined enough to make him question his own sanity. He tells himself it's just heat stroke, but that is the kind of lie you tell right before the city gets worse. The scale of the disaster snaps into focus. This is not a bad afternoon. It's chapter 1 of a city living at 52 degrees C. The whole place looks cooked, and Xiao is standing inside the part where ordinary life starts to die. Back in the subway, Xiao is still trying to move like a normal person, while the city's pressure keeps building around him. Even a loose shoelace feels like a warning now, because in a place this hostile, the smallest mistake can become a death sentence. Later, Xiao keeps telling himself tomorrow will be better, but the night outside and the crowded underground passage both say otherwise. He pushes through anyway, because he still has somewhere to be and people to protect, even if the route is turning into a furnace. That hope gets shredded fast when the heat suddenly turns brutal enough to scorch him on the spot. Xiao barely gets out alive, and the fact that he is still moving at all says more about panic than courage. With fear and exhaustion chewing at him, Xiao starts thinking about a loan shark, which is never the sort of plan that ends in free samples. A man like that only shows up when someone is desperate enough to pay for the privilege. Xiao feels something inside him trying to surface, so now he is fighting a second battle, not just surviving the weather, but keeping whatever power is waking up from eating him alive. He tries to clamp it down, because if he loses control here, the heat isn't the only thing that can kill him. The city keeps moving through the heat anyway, all those footsteps grinding onward like survival is a schedule nobody can skip. Xiao is still in that crowd, but now he is no longer just a tired worker. He's someone being pushed toward the edge. By the time Xiao reaches the bandaged man, the tension has already curdled into open conflict. The man chews him out for being the sort of person fit only for deliveries, and Xiao can only apologize weakly, which tells you exactly how little room he has to push back. Then the bandaged man softens just enough to keep Xiao listening, because the weather itself has become the real enemy here. His warning lands like a final shove. This apocalypse is not easing up, and Xiao is already deep enough in it that every next step matters. The bandaged man stops treating Xiao like a nuisance and goes straight for the throat. This is the lesson, and the city is teaching it with interest. That leaves Xiao alone in the failing light, with no more room to hide behind apology or work clothes. Someone even asks if the bandaged man is going too far, but the warning comes too late because Xiao's body is already breaking into something else. He starts begging, not out of pride, but pure panic. And that tells everyone nearby the real problem is no longer attitude. It's the thing waking up inside him. The thing inside Xiao answers in the ugliest way possible, babbling like a scared person while it claws for control, and the bandaged man tries to talk it down as if that might still work. It doesn't. The transformation bursts outward, and Xiao's first visible power-up costs him the last scraps of normal life. Back in the growing chaos, a young man gets pinned by a dark figure and learns the hard way that cockiness is a terrible shield. The pain hits so hard that the whole crowd realizes this is no longer a scare, it's an outbreak, and somebody in front of them has just crossed the line into mutation. The creature's change keeps spreading through the crowd, and now the panic becomes contagious. What matters here is simple. Once one body mutates, everyone else has to decide whether they freeze, flee, or get torn apart waiting for help. A security guard tries to hold the line, but the thing behind him treats that like a joke and knocks him down hard. The creature starts taunting like it owns the place, which means the people around it are already losing before they even understand what they're fighting. The room turns into a stampede, with one side screaming for help and the other side trying not to get eaten for being slow. Then the bear fully manifests and starts smashing its way through the escape route, so the crowd stops being a crowd and turns into prey. Caught in the middle of that disaster, Xiao has to force his own power down before it tears him apart from the inside. He locks onto the toilet and elevator as his only escape, pushes through the human wall in front of him, and the pressure finally drags his transformation closer to the surface. Amid the wreckage, a woman admits she has a child, and that single line gives the whole panic a human face. Xiao's rescue leaves her shaken but safe, and her thanks lands like proof that in this furnace of a city, even one saved life still matters. Xiao is no longer just running from panic, he's running from an outbreak. The insect-like creatures flood the corridor behind him, and the only thing keeping him alive is the ugly, stubborn decision to keep moving when everything in the building wants him dead. He grabs whatever support he can and forces his way through the doorway, but the swarm keeps reaching after him like the whole place has turned into one giant trap. That escape matters because it proves the danger is spreading past a single hallway now, and Xiao is already losing the luxury of thinking this is still an isolated accident. Back inside the next room, Xiao realizes the nightmare is not behind him at all, because more threats are still climbing in and the room is getting sealed off from every safe direction. His fear snaps into sharper awareness, and that's the turn where panic stops helping and survival tactics have to take over. Outside, the city itself is collapsing into a full-scale ruin, with fire, rubble, and creatures overrunning everything in sight. Xiao sees enough to understand the real stakes. This is not a building problem anymore, it's a citywide disaster, and if he cannot adapt fast, there may be nowhere left to run. Then the biggest threat steps into focus, a grotesque creature with the kind of presence that makes it obvious ordinary people never stood a chance. Xiao answers by pushing power up from inside himself, which means he's finally crossing from helpless survivor into someone who can actually fight back. Now Xiao is armed and thinking like a hunter instead of prey, gripping the sword and reading the path ahead. He knows there is only one monster worth reaching, and the cost of getting there is simple. One wrong move, and he gives the whole fight away. So Xiao closes the distance and commits to the attack. He doesn't win because he's stronger than the nightmare in front of him yet. He wins this moment by refusing to hesitate, and that first real strike proves his growth is no longer theoretical. Later, the conflict escalates into a more brutal phase, as Xiao faces the transformed battlefield with his power still showing in his body and his expression. The rain, the glowing eyes, the staff braced in both hands, and the grotesque mass tearing open nearby all point to the same truth. The apocalypse is mutating, and Xiao is getting dragged deeper into its worst shape. Xiao is staring straight at a living chunk of disaster now, and the ugly truth is that this fight is no longer about normal people surviving normal streets. The thing he's up against is already mutating the battlefield around him, so if he hesitates here, he gets swallowed by the heat and the flesh together. Xiao answers the panic the only way he can. He clamps down, grips his staff with both hands, and forces himself to stay in the fight even as the power in his body flares hot enough to show on his skin. That's the turn here because he stops reacting like prey and starts using the thing, changing him as a weapon instead of a curse. The creature closes in and tries to crush the opening he made, but Xiao keeps his footing long enough for the woman beside him to kick back and buy a sliver of space. The monster's rage tells him the tactic works, which means survival now depends on them holding together for one more ugly second. Xiao spots the one tool the apocalypse didn't strip from him and rips out a fire extinguisher, because raw force is failing and improvised survival is the only game left. When the spray actually slows the creature down, he proves he is thinking under pressure now, not just swinging blind like some office worker who got lost on the way to work and found hell instead. Back in the underpass, Xiao keeps moving because standing still in this heat means losing everything, and the extinguisher becomes his ugly little shield while he checks the route ahead. The woman at the doorway matters here because she is no longer just a bystander. She is part of the break in the panic that keeps him pushing forward. In the underpass, the fight shifts from survival to a grim search for whoever is still trapped in this mess, and the woman starts naming the place like she's trying to keep her own sanity together. Her voice ties the chaos to a real address, so Xiao knows this isn't random slaughter anymore. It's a disaster spreading through lived-in places people actually need to get back to. Then the transformation in front of him stops being a hint and turns into a full reveal, and Xiao has to face the fact that this world is making monsters out of bodies and heat alike. That's the cost of surviving this long. Every victory just drags him deeper into a city that is still changing around him. Xiao is already deep in the fight, pushing through the heat as if the only thing keeping him upright is spite and momentum. He reaches up, slams through the resistance in front of him, and keeps moving because stopping in this world means getting cooked alive. Still pinned in the chaos, Xiao crouches and starts thinking like a survivor instead of a victim, even asking whether the delivery is supposed to be on time, which says everything about how badly normal life has been warped here. Then he accepts that he may already be paying for something, while the creature closing in turns that grim joke into a real death sentence. The pressure breaks into open combat, and Xiao has to swing first because hesitation is a luxury he no longer has. A masked figure jumps into the same mess and proves the whole area is becoming a free-for-all, not a safe route out. The fight shifts again when the survivors start arguing over supplies, and that matters because water and bottles are now as valuable as weapons. One woman lays it out plainly. There were never many bottles to begin with, so every one of them is a reason people start looking at each other like thieves. Now the story cuts to the underpass, a named checkpoint people use to navigate the city, and the meeting there makes it clear the disaster has pulled strangers into the same choking tunnel. Xiao stands ready in the corridor because this is no longer about one monster, but about surviving whoever else gets trapped down here with him. The creature's roar tells everyone the next clash is unavoidable, and Wang Qi, a side survivor who fights with fire, decides to go loud instead of careful. He warns the others to stay sharp, then burns straight through the middle of the encounter and proves his whole style is built around overwhelming force. That fire doesn't just win the exchange, it exposes the ugly truth behind these survivors. Power is useful only as long as it keeps running. The fire being even has to spell it out, while Wang Qi starts panicking over a lighter like the apocalypse still owes him a smoke break. The tension spikes when Wang Qi turns on a woman in the middle of the wreckage, because now the conflict is not just against monsters, but between desperate people who want the same scraps. She calls him out for hiding the lighter, and the way everyone snaps at each other shows how fast heat and fear turn teamwork into accusation. A masked man then barrels in and beats an enemy down hard, using the chaos to dominate whoever is left standing. He taunts the defeated survivor for being useless even after all that fighting, which tells Xiao the real danger here is that people are starting to act like the furnace has burned out whatever mercy they had left. Back in the present of the fight, the masked man's face fills the frame in a way that makes one thing obvious. This guy is enjoying the collapse a little too much. Xiao is now trapped in a city where every survivor has become either a rival, a weapon, or a warning. The injured woman finally has to admit what she found, and it's not a weapon or a miracle, just a lighter the apocalypse has turned into a precious little lifeline. That tiny flame matters, because in this furnace world, even something this small can decide who freezes, who burns, and who gets to keep pretending they're in control. The masked man pushes for answers, and the woman's throwaway line about always carrying one with her tells Xiao these survivors are already living by paranoia, not trust. Then the next guy steps in, Wang Qi, a combat survivor with enough nerve to introduce himself in the middle of all this chaos like he's at a job interview, which is honestly a bold hobby in a burning city. Xiao answers the threat the only way he can, by turning the heat itself into a weapon and hurling it down before the enemy can close the distance. It works too well for a second, because the blast sends him flying, and that's the ugly trade-off here. Every burst of power keeps him alive, but it also proves this new force can chew up the user just as fast as the target. Right after that win, the ground itself starts betraying everyone, as something huge pushes up from below and refuses to stay buried. Xiao and the others realize this isn't a normal fight anymore, because the heat has stopped being a hazard and started acting like a trigger for whatever is mutating in the city. Now the survivors face the real problem. The creature is evolving in front of them, and panic spreads faster than any flame. RQN screams for everyone to run, but by then the red heat pulse is already rolling out, catching people in its reach and forcing Xiao to stare straight into the kind of power that can turn a person from scared to dangerous in one breath. The thing in the dark finally answers the survivors' panic, and it is not here to negotiate. As the red haze thickens, grotesque figures start pushing through it, and Xiao realizes the heat has become a signal, calling whatever is mutating the city straight to them. Now Xiao is the one standing in the middle of the furnace, and the pressure gets turned on him directly. The creatures demand that he release everything he has, which means this fight is no longer about surviving the heat, but about whether he can hold his power without losing himself. Xiao stops holding back and lets the power rip through the battlefield, wiping out the little sense of control anyone still had. That blast proves the apocalypse is evolving faster than the people trapped inside it, because the heat does not just burn anymore, it transforms. Back in the present, Xiao's power has crossed from danger into violence, and he uses it like a weapon against another survivor. He lands the hit hard, but the smoking body and the blood on the ground make the cost obvious. This world is now breeding people who can fight like monsters and survive it. The heat inside Xiao reaches its ugliest form, and the monster behind him makes the real point of the scene. This power is not random, it responds to emotion. Xiao pushes back anyway, and the strange exchange shows he is not just getting stronger, he is starting to resonate with the same force that is twisting the city. Away from Xiao, the chaos leaves ordinary people shattered and easier to control. One child is cornered, scolded, and threatened with being used against his mother, which turns the apocalypse into something even nastier than survival, because fear is becoming a tool. That pressure finally spills into full-scale ruin as a huge red monster appears and drags the survivors into the next layer of the disaster. The city is no longer dealing with isolated freaks, because now the creatures are big enough to overwhelm groups, and the trauma they leave behind is starting to look personal for everyone involved. Inside the freezer area, the tension finally breaks. The hat-wearing figure pauses long enough to say goodbye and tell the others to hide, which makes it clear this is no longer a clean escape, just a quick chance to survive. The fight kicks back in immediately, because hesitation is fatal here. Someone lunges into a burst of speed and heat, trying to force the situation open before the freezer trap closes around them. The freezer gives this whole mess a nasty twist. The labeled cold storage is part of whatever experiment is going on, and Xiao reaches for the red sphere like he's either found a tool or made a terrible mistake. That touch wakes up an inhuman thing with too many tentacles, and the city disaster stops being random chaos and starts looking engineered. Xiao tries to hold his ground, but the creature keeps growing past anything a normal survivor can handle. This is the real turn. The enemy is not just stronger, it evolves when Xiao interacts with it, which means the apocalypse is learning too. The creature answers by hammering him down and wrapping him up, turning the fight into a straight-up capture. Xiao's pain tells the whole story, because now he is not just losing the exchange, he is getting pinned by something built to overwhelm. Back in the same disaster zone, the violence spills outward and starts dropping everyone around it. One blast sends bodies and debris flying. Then the survivors realize the bigger problem is not one monster, but a whole situation they can no longer control. The search for safety leads straight into another trap. The door is locked and the temperature has collapsed to -35, which is the kind of number that makes survival sound personal. Even the adults are reduced to shivering and panicking, because now the apocalypse can kill you without claws. With death closing in from both monsters and the cold, someone asks the kid where he would run if he got out alive. And that question matters because it is the first real sign that people are still planning beyond the next minute. Then the mood shifts again when one man jokes that the other finally speaks like a human, which tells us these two have already survived enough together to stop pretending they are strangers. Xiao is still trying to process what this even means when someone says his full name, and that hits him harder than the cold ever could. In a world where people are usually too busy surviving to remember your name, being singled out means something has already changed around him. Back in the same frozen room, a woman steps in and cuts through the tension by calling the two of them handsome lads, which is her way of forcing a little humanity back into a place that has already tried to kill them. Xiao and the others sit with that for a second because the apocalypse is getting bigger, but so is the strange sense that people are starting to gather instead of scatter. Elsewhere over the burning city, the disaster has stopped looking like isolated bad luck and started looking like a war zone. Armed soldiers move on the target office building with orders to engage, which tells Xiao's world is no longer just panicked civilians and random monsters, but organized forces trying to claw back control. In the industrial ruins, Xiao finally faces the thing that explains what is happening to him. The insects are not just part of the chaos, they are the source of the mutation spreading through this hellscape. That means his changing body is not an accident at all, but the first clue that the apocalypse has rules, and those rules are written in bytes and survival. Back in Xiao's own head, the realization gets uglier. He remembers the earlier mutations, begs for mercy from whatever is inside this disaster, and then admits the key truth that may be saving him. Unlike the others, he is used to choking down his emotions, so the change cannot fully take hold of him. That insight gives him a direction instead of just fear, so Xiao sets his target on the convenience store and pushes forward until he gets there cleanly. The victory is small, but in an apocalypse this hostile, simply arriving means he is still beating the heat, the creatures, and the collapse around him. When he looks over the aftermath, the path is already littered with defeated enemies, and the twisted creatures ahead make it clear the danger is only mutating faster. Then a command pulls the story toward the underpass, a named route that now matters because it is where supplies and allies are being pulled together instead of being left to die alone. At the underpass, two figures finally meet up, and one of them carries a weapon that looks more wrong than useful, which is exactly the sort of object this apocalypse loves to hand people. Xiao also spots the security camera overhead, so now he knows someone is watching, and that means the next move is not just about survival, but about who is controlling the board. Xiao pushes his heat-borne power into his fists and holds his focus, which means this mutation is no longer a random panic response. The small Japanese labeled device makes the scary part clearer. Someone can identify or measure these abilities now, and that turns survival into data collection with a battery pack attached. The next threat crashes into Xiao, but he refuses to get pinned by it and answers with raw force. He is not just surviving the attack anymore, he is proving the apocalypse changed him into someone who can push back. Xiao commits fully to the counterattack and tears through the pressure around him, forcing the fight to break in his favor. By the time he steadies himself, the message is simple. Whatever is hunting people here can be hurt, and Xiao is becoming one of the few people able to do it. After the burst of violence, Yao faces another survivor at close range, and the danger shifts from muscle to self-control. The warning is brutal but useful. Do not show fear, because if they can control what they feel, they may stop attracting the things that feed on panic. That advice gets tested immediately when a larger creature bears down, forcing the survivors to move before fear gets them killed. One man grabs another through the chaos, a weapon comes out, and Xiao cuts through the hesitation with a clear order. Run with him, not away from sense. Xiao warns that survival now depends on their own choices, which is not a pep talk so much as a receipt for staying alive. As they race through the interior corridor, he threatens to abandon anyone who refuses to talk, because secrets are now almost as dangerous as the monsters. The survivor finally gives up the hidden truth. They discovered a substance that suppresses emotions fast. Taking it keeps monsters from being drawn to them, but the drug is controlled tightly, and when it wears off, the trapped survivors become bait with a countdown timer. That raises the bigger question. Who is powerful enough to ration fear itself? The answer is the young master, the group chairman and owner of the building, a wealthy figure who mobilized resources and built a top-floor shelter as the monster crisis spread. Now the building stops being just a place to hide and becomes a controlled survival system. They are at the very back of the first floor lobby, and the discovery of a resource point means whoever controls this area controls food, supplies, and leverage. Then the threat level jumps again when someone admits he has a gun. In a world where fear attracts monsters, a firearm is either protection or the loudest bad decision in the room, and even Xiao has to process what that means. By the time Xiao stands among the gathered people, the apocalypse has expanded from heat and monsters into factions, rationed drugs, shelters, weapons, and leaders pulling strings. Xiao has found potential allies, but he has also stepped into a system where every resource comes with someone else's hand around it. Inside the shelter, Xiao has gained a path to supplies, but the price is stepping into someone else's controlled territory, where safety depends on obeying the person with the weapons. The conversation turns darker when a waiting survivor admits the person they are discussing is not merely dangerous, but a demon more terrifying than the monsters outside, which means the apocalypse is now breeding threats that can wear a human face. That fear immediately becomes leverage. The armed survivor lowers his weapon only long enough to demand access upstairs. He does not ask for trust, he orders compliance, and in a shelter built on rationed food and panic, a gun turns one hallway into a private elevator service with terrible customer reviews. Upstairs, the shelter leader welcomes the newcomers into his shelter, a stocked refuge where supplies run continuously and survival has rules. He explains the deal plainly. Each person gets 1 bottle of water, 2 packs of biscuits, and 1 loaf, which sounds generous until everyone realizes the food comes with obedience attached. The orange-haired survivor challenges the shelter leader on the obvious problem. If weapons decide everything, then how can anyone's safety be guaranteed? The shelter leader answers by drawing his gun and pressing it to the survivor's head, proving the shelter's real law in 1 ugly second. Protection exists only as long as the leader feels respected. The shelter leader stays calm while the frightened survivor apologizes. And that calm is the scariest part, because he is not losing control, he is demonstrating it. Then he addresses the room with the gun still visible, making sure every survivor understands that his shelter runs on rations, fear, and his permission. A mysterious figure with glowing eyes enters the equation, hinting that the shelter's power structure is not the only danger forming in the ruins. Then the shelter leader calls out Wang Qi, a male survivor tied to the combat side of this chaos, and invites him for a private chat, which turns the next threat from public intimidation into a quieter negotiation behind closed doors.